The silk blindfold pressed against Jackie Chan's eyes felt heavier than it should have. The darkness behind it, absolute and suffocating. September 15, 1978. Hong Kong's humidity hung in the air of the Golden Harvest studio like a wet blanket. And somewhere in that oppressive heat, 3 men were preparing to end his career before it truly began. What happened in the next 15 seconds would either make Jackie Chan a legend or leave him broken on the polished wooden floor of Studio 7. But to understand why Jackie willingly stood there, defenseless and blind, while 3 of Hong Kong's most dangerous martial artists circled him like predators, you have to go back 6 months earlier to a conversation that changed everything. The neon lights of Nathan Road painted the wet streets in electric blues and reds as Jackie hurried through the Tsim Sha Tsui district that rainy March evening. At 24, he was already tired of being called the next Bruce Lee, tired of the constant comparisons, tired of directors who saw him as nothing more than a pale imitation of a dead legend. The meeting he was rushing to would either give him the chance to prove himself or destroy what little reputation he had managed to build. Lo Wei's office sat above a dim sum restaurant, the smell of pork buns and jasmine tea drifting up through the floorboards. Jackie climbed the narrow stairs 2 at a time, his heart hammering against his ribs. The legendary director had summoned him, and when Lo Wei called, "You didn't keep him waiting. Sit down, boy," Lo Wei said without looking up from the script scattered across his desk. The man who had directed Bruce Lee's first major films looked older than his 60 years. His weathered face carved with deep lines of disappointment and fading dreams. "I have a proposition for you." Jackie perched on the edge of the chair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The office smelled of cigarettes and old leather, and somewhere in the distance, he could hear the clatter of matching tiles from the gambling den next door. "You know what your problem is?" Lo Wei finally raised his eyes, studying Jackie with the intensity of a jeweler examining a flawed diamond. "You're trying to be someone you're not. Every kick, every punch, every expression on your face screams Bruce Lee. But Bruce Lee is dead, and the world doesn't need another one." The words hit Jackie like a physical blow. He had spent years perfecting his craft at the China Drama Academy under Master Yu Jimuin, enduring brutal training that would have broken lesser men. He had learned to move like water, to strike like lightning, to endure pain that would cripple ordinary people. And now this man was telling him it was all worthless. "I want to give you a chance to prove something," Lo Wei continued, leaning back in his chair. "Not to me, not to the critics, not to the audiences. To yourself." Jackie's mouth felt dry as sandpaper. "What kind of chance?" "There's a demonstration being planned for some American investors. They want to see what Hong Kong action cinema can offer. Real combat, not the wire work and camera tricks they think we rely on." Lo Wei picked up a photograph from his desk and slid it across to Jackie. 3 fighters, all legitimate black belts, all with something to prove. Jackie stared at the photograph. 3 men, each radiating the quiet confidence that came from years of serious training. The first was tall and lean, with the fluid stance of a karate practitioner. The second was broader, his posture suggesting the grounded power of kung fu. The third was compact and wiry, his eyes holding the alertness of someone who had learned to fight in the streets before perfecting his art in the dojo. "They want a demonstration of traditional Hong Kong cinema combat techniques," Lo Wei said. "But here's the catch. To prove that our methods aren't just movie magic, you'll be blindfolded. No choreography, no camera angles, no second takes. Just you, them, and whatever skills you actually possess." The photograph trembled slightly in Jackie's hands. "And if I lose, then you'll have your answer about whether you belong in this business." Lo Wei's voice carried no malice, just the cold weight of reality. "But if you win, if you can prove that Hong Kong action stars are more than just pretty faces and wirework, then maybe the world will finally see what we're really capable of." Jackie set the photograph down carefully, his mind racing. 3 against 1 was difficult enough under normal circumstances. Blindfolded, it would be nearly impossible. But something in Lo Wei's words resonated with him. Something about proving himself, not just to the world, but to himself. When Jackie asked, 6 months, September 15th. That gives you time to prepare, to decide if you're serious about this. Lo Wei's expression softened slightly. "I won't lie to you, boy. This could end your career before it starts. But it could also be the beginning of something extraordinary." Jackie walked out of that office, into the neon-washed streets, with his mind made up. 6 months to prepare for what might be the most important 15 seconds of his life. The training began the next morning at dawn. Jackie had always been disciplined, but now he pushed himself beyond anything he had ever experienced. He started each day with meditation, sitting in perfect stillness for an hour before sunrise, learning to quiet his mind and sharpen his other senses. If he was going to fight blind, he needed to hear the whisper of fabric against skin, feel the displacement of air from a thrown punch, sense the subtle shifts in his opponent's balance. Master Yu Jim Yuen watched his former student with growing concern as the weeks passed. Jackie was losing weight, his eyes taking on the hollow intensity of someone pushing themselves to the breaking point. "You are training like a man preparing to die," the old master said one evening as Jackie practiced his forms in the academy's courtyard. The ancient trees cast long shadows in the fading light, and the sound of other students training echoed from the surrounding buildings. "Maybe I am," Jackie replied, not breaking his rhythm. His movements had become more fluid, more instinctive. Where once his techniques had been precise and calculated, now they flowed like water finding its path down a mountain. "Fighting blind is not about technique, Master," you said, settling onto a stone bench to watch. "It's about trust. Trust in your body, trust in your training, trust in something deeper than conscious thought." Jackie stopped mid-form, sweat glistening on his forehead, despite the cool evening air. "How do you trust something you can't see?" "Close your eyes, Master," you commanded. Jackie obeyed, and immediately, the world transformed. The distant sound of traffic became a rhythmic pulse. The rustle of leaves in the evening breeze painted pictures in his mind. The scent of jasmine from the academy's garden told him which way the wind was blowing. "Now, Master," you said softly, "tell me where I am." Jackie tilted his head, listening. He could hear his master's breathing, slow and steady, coming from the bench. But there was something else, a subtle displacement of sound that suggested movement. "You're standing up," Jackie said, "moving to your left." "Good. What else?" Jackie focused deeper. The sound of Master Yu's footsteps was almost silent, but the old man's breathing had changed slightly, becoming more controlled. "You're preparing to attack." The rush of air came from his right, not his left. Master Yu had deliberately made noise in one direction while moving in another. Jackie's body responded without conscious thought, dropping into a low stance and sweeping his arm up to block. His forearm connected with Master Yu's wrist, just inches from his face. "Better," Master Yu said, and Jackie could hear the smile in his voice. "But you're still thinking too much. In a real fight, there won't be time to analyze and decide. Your body must know what to do before your mind realizes the danger." The training intensified. Jackie spent hours each day blindfolded, learning to navigate the academy's obstacle courses by sound and touch alone. He practiced with partners who would attack without warning, teaching his reflexes to respond to threats he couldn't see. His other senses sharpened until he could identify people by the sound of their heartbeat, predict their movements by the way they shifted their weight. But it wasn't just physical preparation. Jackie dove deep into the philosophical aspects of martial arts, studying the ancient texts that spoke of Wu Wei, the principle of effortless action. He learned about the concept of Ziren, naturalness, the idea that true skill came not from forcing techniques, but from allowing them to emerge naturally from the situation. As the months passed, word of the upcoming demonstration spread through Hong Kong's martial arts community. Some called Jackie brave, others called him foolish. The three fighters he would face were no mere movie extras. Li Wei was a legitimate karate champion who had studied in Japan under some of the art's greatest masters. Chen Ming was a traditional kung fu practitioner whose family had been teaching martial arts for 7 generations. David Park was a mixed martial artist who had fought in underground tournaments across Southeast Asia and never lost. "They're not actors." Jackie's friend and fellow martial artist Yuan Bao warned him over dinner one evening in late August. They sat in a small restaurant in central Hong Kong, the city's lights twinkling beyond the windows like fallen stars. Li Wei broke 3 ribs in his last demonstration. Chen Ming once put a man in the hospital just during a friendly sparring session. And Park fights like his life depends on it every single time. Jackie pushed the food around on his plate, his appetite gone. The demonstration was less than a month away, and despite all his training, doubt gnawed at him like a persistent ache. "Maybe that's what I need," Jackie said finally. "Maybe I need to face people who won't pull their punches, who won't treat me like a movie star playing dress-up." Yuan Bo leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Jackie, these men have nothing to lose and everything to gain by defeating you. If they can beat Hong Kong's rising action star in front of American investors, it could change their lives. They'll be fighting for their futures. Then I'll have to fight for mine," Jackie replied. The final weeks of preparation took on an almost mystical quality. Jackie's training moved beyond the physical into something deeper and more primal. He would sit in meditation for hours, visualizing the upcoming fight in minute detail. He imagined every possible attack, every combination his opponents might use, until the scenarios played out in his mind like a perfectly choreographed dance. Master, you introduced him to an ancient training method called ghost fighting, where Jackie would battle imaginary opponents in complete darkness. He learned to trust his instincts so completely that his body would react to threats that existed only in his mind, preparing him for the moment when real danger would require the same instantaneous response. The night before the demonstration, Jackie couldn't sleep. He walked through the empty streets of Hong Kong, the city that had shaped him, that had given him his dreams, and now demanded he prove worthy of them. The harbor reflected the lights of 1,000 buildings, and somewhere in the distance, he could hear the sound of ships' horns calling across the water. He found himself at the peak, looking down at the sprawling metropolis below. The city never truly slept, but at 3 in the morning, it dozed fitfully, its energy subdued, but never fully extinguished. Jackie thought about all the people down there, pursuing their own dreams, fighting their own battles, and he realized that tomorrow's demonstration was about more than just his career. It was about proving that dreams were worth fighting for, that skill and determination could triumph over fear and doubt. When dawn broke over Hong Kong on September 15th, Jackie was already at the Golden Harvest studio. He had arrived early, not because he needed the extra time to prepare, but because he wanted to feel the space, to understand the arena where his fate would be decided. Studio 7 was larger than most people realized, a cavernous space with polished wooden floors and mirrors lining 3 of the 4 walls. The ceiling was high enough to accommodate the most ambitious fight choreography, and the lighting could be adjusted to create any mood the directors desired. Today, it was set to harsh, unforgiving brightness that would capture every detail of what was about to unfold. The American investors arrived at 10 o'clock sharp, a group of serious-looking men in expensive suits who spoke in hushed tones about market penetration and demographic appeal. They set up cameras to record the demonstration. Though Jackie knew that what they were really evaluating couldn't be captured on film, they were looking for something intangible, some quality that would convince them that Hong Kong action cinema could succeed in the American market. Li Wei arrived first among the fighters, moving with the precise economy of motion that marked a true karate practitioner. He was taller than Jackie had expected, with the lean build of someone who had spent years perfecting his technique rather than building bulk. His eyes held the calm focus of a predator, and when he bowed respectfully to Jackie, there was no warmth in the gesture, only professional acknowledgement. Chen Ming came next, and Jackie immediately felt the weight of traditional kung fu mastery in a man's presence. He moved like his grandfather and great-grandfather before him, with the fluid grace that came from a lifetime of study. His hands were scarred from years of conditioning, and his stance radiated the grounded power of the earth itself. David Park was last to arrive, and Jackie understood immediately why Yuan Bo had been concerned. The man carried himself like violence barely contained, his eyes constantly scanning for threats and opportunities. He had the compact, muscular build of someone who fought for survival rather than sport, and his greeting to Jackie was nothing more than a curt nod. Lo Wei gathered everyone together in the center of the studio. The investors sat in chairs arranged along one wall, their cameras positioned to capture multiple angles. The overhead lights hummed softly, casting everything in stark relief. "Gentlemen," Lo Wei addressed the group, his voice carrying clearly through the large space. "What you're about to witness is a demonstration of traditional Hong Kong martial arts techniques. Mr. Chan will be blindfolded and will defend himself against 3 attackers using only the skills he has developed through years of training." He turned to Jackie, holding up the silk blindfold. "Are you ready?" Jackie nodded, though his mouth felt dry, and his heart was hammering against his ribs. 6 months of preparation had led to this moment, and now that it was here, the weight of it threatened to crush him. The blindfold slipped over his eyes, and the world disappeared. The studio's harsh lights vanished, replaced by absolute darkness that seemed to press against his face like a living thing. Sound became everything. He could hear the whisper of fabric as the 3 fighters moved into position around him. He could hear the barely audible hum of the cameras recording every moment. He could hear his own heartbeat, too fast, too loud. "Begin when ready," Lo Wei announced, his voice seeming to come from very far away. For a moment, nothing happened. Jackie stood in the center of the space, his senses straining to gather information about his opponent's positions. Li Wei was to his left, about 8 feet away, his breathing controlled and steady. Chen Ming was behind him and slightly to the right, his stance so grounded that Jackie could almost feel the man's connection to the floor. David Park was the most dangerous, moving constantly, his position shifting like smoke. The attack came without warning. Jackie heard the whisper of air displacement, a split second before Li Wei's punch would have connected with his solar plexus. His body responded without conscious thought, twisting away from the strike, while his left hand swept up to deflect the attack. But even as he moved, he sensed Chen Ming rushing in from behind, and the real dance began. Time seemed to slow, as Jackie's 6 months of training took over. His right foot swept back to catch Chen Ming's advancing leg, while his body continued its rotation, away from Li Wei's follow-up strike. The sound of Park's movement told him the third attacker was coming from his right, and Jackie dropped into a low stance, his arms weaving a defensive pattern that seemed to anticipate attacks before they were fully formed. Li Wei's karate was precise and powerful, each technique delivered with textbook perfection, but Jackie had learned to read the rhythm of traditional karate, the slight pause between techniques that allowed for perfect form. He slipped inside Li Wei's guard, his palm strike aimed at the man's solar plexus, only to twist away as Chen Ming's tiger claw technique whistled past his ear. Chen Ming fought like his ancestors, with flowing movements that seemed to draw power from the earth itself. His techniques were circular and continuous, each attack flowing into the next without pause. Jackie found himself moving in response to this rhythm, his own movements becoming more fluid, more natural. But it was David Park who proved the most challenging. The mixed martial artist fought without pattern or tradition, his attacks coming from unexpected angles with brutal efficiency. Jackie felt the wind from a kick that would have taken his head off, dropped to avoid an elbow strike that could have shattered his jaw, rolled away from a knee that would have ended the fight instantly. The three fighters pressed their attack, and for a moment, Jackie felt overwhelmed. Without sight, he was fighting not just three opponents, but his own fear, his own doubt. The darkness that had once been absolute began to shift, and Jackie realized something profound was happening. He was no longer fighting blind. His other senses had expanded beyond their normal limits, painting a picture of the fight that was more complete than vision could ever provide. He could feel the heat radiating from his opponents' bodies, hear the subtle changes in their breathing that telegraphed their intentions, sense the micro-movements that preceded every attack. Li Wei came in with a combination that should have been devastating, a perfectly executed sequence of punches and kicks. But Jackie was no longer where Li Wei expected him to be. He had become like water, flowing around the attacks, redirecting their force rather than opposing it directly. Chen Ming tried to trap him with a complex series of grabbing techniques, the kind of close-quarters combat that traditional kung fu excelled at. But Jackie's body seemed to know how to respond before his mind could process the danger. His arms moved in perfect counter-spirals, neutralizing each grab while setting up his own attacks. David Park, growing frustrated with his inability to land a solid hit, launched himself forward with the kind of out-out assault that had won him countless underground fights. But Jackie was no longer there to receive it. He had stepped aside at the last possible moment, and Park's momentum carried him past, off balance and vulnerable. The counterattack came naturally, without thought or hesitation. Jackie's palm strike caught Li Wei in the solar plexus, doubling him over. His spinning heel kick connected with Chen Ming's ribs, sending the traditional master stumbling backward, and his elbow strike found David Park's jaw just as the man tried to recover his balance. All three fighters went down. The entire exchange had lasted 15 seconds. Jackie stood in the center of the studio, his chest heaving, sweat running down his face beneath the blindfold. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of his own breathing and the quiet groans of his three opponents as they struggled to regain their feet. Slowly, carefully, Jackie reached up and removed the blindfold. The harsh studio lights seemed impossibly bright after the darkness, and he blinked rapidly as his eyes adjusted. Li Wei was sitting on the floor, holding his stomach and looking at Jackie with something approaching. Chen Ming was leaning against one of the mirrored walls, his hand pressed to his ribs, his expression unreadable. David Park was on one knee, working his jaw carefully, his eyes holding a new respect. The American investors sat in stunned silence, their cameras having captured every moment of what they had just witnessed. One of them, a silver-haired man who had introduced himself as the senior partner, slowly began to clap. The sound echoed through the studio, and gradually, the others joined in. Li Wei approached Jackie, his weathered face transformed by a smile of genuine pride. "Well?" he asked quietly. Jackie looked around the studio, at the three fighters who had pushed him to his absolute limits. at the investors who had just seen something they would never forget, at the cameras that had recorded what might be the most important 15 seconds of his life. "I think," Jackie said, his voice still shaky from the adrenaline, "I'm ready to stop being the next Bruce Lee." "Good," Lo Wei replied, "because the world doesn't need another Bruce Lee. It needs the first Jackie Chan." The demonstration that day changed everything. The American investors signed a deal that would bring Hong Kong action cinema to global audiences in ways no one had imagined possible. But more importantly, Jackie had discovered something about himself that no amount of traditional training could have taught him. He had learned that true skill wasn't about perfect technique or flawless execution. It was about trust, about surrendering to something deeper than conscious thought, about becoming so completely present in the moment that action and reaction became one seamless flow. The three fighters who had attacked him that day became some of his closest friends and most trusted stunt coordinators in the years that followed. Li Wei brought his karate precision to Jackie's films, helping to create fight scenes that were both beautiful and brutally effective. Chen Ming's traditional kung fu knowledge added depth and authenticity to action sequences that honored the old masters while pushing the art form in new directions. And David Park's street fighting experience helped develop the raw, visceral combat style that would become Jackie's trademark. But the real legacy of that 15-second fight wasn't in the careers it launched or the money it generated. It was in the lesson it taught about the nature of mastery itself. Years later, when young martial artists would ask Jackie how he had managed to defeat 3 skilled opponents while blindfolded, he would tell them about the months of training, about the meditation and the philosophical study, about the countless hours of practice in darkness. But then he would add something that most of them didn't understand until they had faced their own moment of truth. "The blindfold didn't make me blind," he would say. "It helped me see clearly for the first time." He learned that day that the greatest enemy of any martial artist isn't the opponent standing in front of them. It's the doubt that whispers in their ear, the fear that makes them hesitate, the ego that convinces them they need to be someone other than who they truly are. Jackie had spent years trying to be the next Bruce Lee, copying another man's movements, another man's philosophy, another man's way of being in the world. But in those 15 seconds of blindfolded combat, he had discovered something infinitely more valuable: himself. The techniques he used that day weren't from any traditional style. They were pure Jackie Chan, a unique expression of everything he had learned filtered through his own body, his own mind, his own spirit. The fluid movements that seemed to anticipate his opponent's attacks weren't superhuman abilities. They were the natural result of complete presence, of being so totally in the moment that past and future ceased to exist. The fight became legend not because of its spectacular nature, but because it represented something universal. Everyone faces moments when they must choose between playing it safe and risking everything for the chance to discover who they really are. Most people choose safety. Jackie chose the unknown. The silk blindfold that had seemed so threatening that morning became a symbol of liberation. By willingly giving up his sight, Jackie had gained something far more valuable: the ability to see himself clearly. He learned that strength doesn't come from what you can see coming, but from trusting your ability to handle whatever surprises life throws at you. In the years that followed, as Jackie Chan became one of the most recognizable faces in cinema, as his unique blend of martial arts and comedy revolutionized action films, as he inspired countless young people around the world to pursue their dreams, he would often think back to those 15 seconds in Studio 7. They reminded him that the most important battles we fight aren't against external opponents, but against the limitations we place on ourselves. They taught him that mastery isn't about perfection, but about the courage to be authentically yourself, even when you can't see where you're going. And perhaps most importantly, they showed him that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from defeating your enemies, but from discovering that your greatest enemy was the voice in your head telling you that you weren't good enough, strong enough, or worthy enough to succeed. The blindfold had silenced that voice forever. Today, when Jackie Chan tells the story of that September afternoon in 1978, he always ends with the same words: "The day I learned to fight blind was the day I finally learned to see." Because in those 15 seconds of darkness, he discovered a light that would guide him for the rest of his life. The legend wasn't born from the spectacular nature of the fight itself, but from the profound truth it revealed: that our greatest limitations are often self-imposed, and our greatest strengths emerge not when everything is clear, but when we have the courage to trust ourselves in the darkness.